Welcome to the Explainer. You know, as store shelves get more and more crowded with products making incredibly bold promises, we're actually seeing experienced beekeepers looking backward. They're returning to one of the simplest, most basic elements found in nature, iodine. But let's be totally honest right out of the gate here. In modern apiculture, there are absolutely no magic wands. There are no instant solutions. There's literally only the system. So today, we're stripping away the overrated marketing myths and all that old school folklore. We're going to look strictly at how a hive actually functions as a biological engine. Our goal? To demystify iodine not as some kind of miracle cure, but as a potential, very specific gear within that broader system.
Okay, so here is our agenda for today. We're going to systematically break this down, starting with the 50% loss reality. Then we'll look at March, the critical phase. Next, we'll cover redefining iodine's true role, where iodine actually works, the core beekeeping pillars, and finally, why iodine is a tool, not a solution. Let's get right into it.
Starting right at the top with Section 1, the 50% loss reality and the true cost of systemic inefficiency.
50%. Now, to really grasp any intervention in a hive, we first have to understand the true cost of this inefficiency. We aren't just talking about a slightly sluggish colony here, we're talking about a massive, quantifiable drain. Science today clearly shows us that the pathogen Nosema Ceranae can shorten the lifespan of a worker bee by up to 50%. I really want you to think about what that actually means. This isn't just a theory, right? This is what happens in real-world situations when conditions inside the hive deteriorate. Imagine the sheer amount of energy, the time, and the resources that the colony invests into developing that single bee, only for it to practically disappear from the workforce way prematurely. When every second bee is dying halfway through its useful life, that isn't just a localized problem, it's a massive, direct loss inside your entire system. Half of the colony's potential is simply gone. That is the very definition of systemic inefficiency.
Moving right along to Part 2, March, the critical phase, or what I like to call the ultimate microclimate survival test. So this systemic inefficiency we just talked about, it doesn't just happen randomly. It peaks during some very specific windows of vulnerability. And March is arguably one of the absolute most sensitive periods in the entire life cycle of a bee colony. During this time, your winter bees are pushed to the absolute limit of their endurance. They've gone through a long period without any natural food intake, their energy reserves are completely depleted, and exactly at this moment of maximum exhaustion, the new brood begins to develop. Now notice the definition of microclimate here. It really highlights the tipping point for that brood survival. The temperature has to be maintained precisely, and the interior of the hive has got to remain clean. The microclimate isn't just a set of physical parameters, it directly dictates survival. If the humidity inside the hive rises, well, the entire system starts losing stability. That rise in humidity acts as the ultimate catalyst. It activates those pathogen spores, it destabilizes the delicate brood, and it shortens the lifespan of those worker bees, leading straight back to that 50% systemic loss we just looked at. It's literally a deadly domino effect.
All right, Section 3, redefining iodine's true role, separating the myth from the mechanism.
Right in the middle of this high-stakes survival test, we really have to ask ourselves, does iodine genuinely have a place in modern beekeeping, or has it just been fundamentally misunderstood? Let's be absolutely authoritative about this right now. Iodine is not a medicine. It's not a treatment. It absolutely does not cure Nosema, it doesn't solve diseases, and there is no way it can magically save a weak colony. Basically, if you're using it as a cure, you are using it wrong. What iodine actually is a hygienic tool. Whether you're using povidone iodine or Lugol's solution, its function is preventative and environmental. Its primary role is reducing microbiological pressure in the environment. It doesn't act after the problem appears. Instead, it influences the conditions where pathogens develop. In other words, it simply reduces the probability that the problem is even going to show up in the first place.
Which brings us to Part 4, where iodine actually works and the strict rules of engagement.
Since it is strictly a preventative tool, its application requires incredible precision. The golden rule here is less is more. High concentrations can actually be really aggressive and actively harm a bee's delicate intestinal flora. Look, it's not a substitute for proper beekeeping, and it definitely can't compensate for systemic mistakes. So we really need to stick to these highly restrictive use cases. First up, water sources. Standing water is an ideal breeding ground for bacteria, algae, and pathogens, yet it's often totally overlooked in the apiary. Adding just minimal amounts of iodine to water controls that microbiological pressure. You aren't treating the bees, you're simply maintaining a clean environment for them to drink from. Second is spring feeding. During stimulative feeding, you can use extremely small quantities, and I mean only trace amounts, in your syrup or patties. Again, the goal here is purely to support internal hygiene, not to act as some kind of drug directly on the bee itself.
And that brings us to an absolute, non-negotiable hard stop. Never, and I mean literally never, use this during the main nectar flow. The second your bees begin bringing in nectar intended for extraction, every single preventative activity has to stop immediately. Your honey must remain perfectly clean and 100% free from any traces of additives. As a beekeeper, your responsibility isn't just to the survival of the bees, it's to the integrity of the final product, and of course, to the consumer.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 5, the 3 beekeeping pillars, the foundation of a resilient system.
Remember earlier when I said there is only the system? Well, a beehive is a complex biological engine, and you have to build a resilient foundation from the ground up. It's not a machine where you can just swap out a broken part or pour in some quick additive to fix a fundamental flaw. Looking at these 3 pillars brilliantly illustrates this. Pillar 1 is the microclimate, a dry, stable hive with absolutely no condensation. Pillar 2 is nutrition, natural pollen intake, and adequate energy support. And Pillar 3 is hygiene, managing that microbiological pressure. Now, this is exactly where iodine fits. But here is the most common, totally devastating mistake beekeepers make. They jump straight to Pillar 3. They try to solve a complex problem with a simple additive, searching for that one quick intervention, without ever actually securing the first 2 foundational pillars.
I'm going to be a little brutally honest here. Just like this quote says, if the first 2 pillars are not fulfilled, the third one has no significance. Seriously, if your hive has poor ventilation and the walls are damp, pathogens are going to develop regardless of whatever magical additive you try to use. If your bees lack natural pollen and adequate energy, no nutritional supplement or hygienic tool in the world is going to save that colony. Iodine is utterly useless if you haven't done your job as a beekeeper to stabilize the microclimate and ensure proper nutrition first. It is really just that simple.
Finally, Section 6, our final takeaways. Tool, not a solution. When we actually look at the analytical data, colonies that develop steadily are inherently resilient. Within a deeply understood, properly structured system that has a stable microclimate and great nutrition, iodine is a really valuable tool. It can absolutely contribute additional stability. But if you use it without understanding the whole picture, its effect is negligible or worse, negative. Understanding the whole system is literally your only path towards sustainable apiculture. Everything else is just a shortcut that inevitably leads to losses.
So, okay, we've settled the iodine debate. It's a systemic tool for sure, but definitely not a miracle. But what happens when the threat isn't just microscopic spores, but an external enemy that is actively draining your bees' energy? In our next explainer, we're going to tackle the biggest elephant in the apiary, Varroa. We'll be putting plant-based preparations and essential oils under the exact same analytical microscope. Are they real solutions to the Varroa problem, or are they just temporary illusions? Thank you so much for joining me and for approaching your beekeeping with logic, attention, and a real focus on the system. I will see you in the next explainer.